Happy Friday, everybody. And hey, everyone, thanks for joining this afternoon. It's another future-focused live Q&A. I'm looking forward to this one. So I'm going to do a rundown of a few of the biggest topics that have been on my mind this week as it relates to the intersection of business, tech, and people. And then I've got a few questions that I've curated from my communities that I like to talk about. But it's a live stream, so you can ask things along the way too, and I will take care of that. So the three topics that I have booked, but you can ask anything. The three topics are Accenture recently announced in one of their earnings calls that they this is the misleading part. It sounds like they're going to be laying off 11,000. They actually have laid off 11,000 people as a result of them being unreskillable, whatever that means. So we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about AI's new Sora app, which, if you are not aware, is an AI deepfake app. It's designed to be the new TikTok for nothing but AI deepfakes. So I've got questions and answers related to that one. And then the third one is there's a growing number of conversations about why on earth do the biggest names in AI, why are they busy talking about the end of the world? And why does it seem like some of them are actually excited about it? So I get actually quite a few questions related to this. People ask, what was my take on the Doomsday possibility? So I figured I'd include that as well. So those are the three. If you find this helpful, hey, it's one of those live stream things. So I'm going to say like, subscribe, follow, whichever one. I'm multi-streaming. So wherever you are, thanks for joining me this week. And you can, like I said, I'm taking comments live. So you can drop them in and I will answer questions, things like that along the way. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the week. And this is designed not to be the academic or theoretical AI conversation, but more practical. Like, what does this actually mean for us as, regular people type of a thing? So let's jump into it. To set some context. So for Accenture's big announcement, it's all over the press. And this one's actually one I'm going deeper in on Substack. If you follow my Substack, so Monday, I'm dropping a podcast specifically to dig into this. And then Wednesday, I've got a long form article where I'm actually talking more about this whole layoff thing. Extremely frustrating. But essentially what happened was they were on an earnings call and they had to explain this kind of $865 million investment that they're making in getting rid of 11,000 people. And so they talked about the fact that basically 11,000 people didn't make the cut when it came to AI and being able to be skilled in that. And I've got so many issues with this, which is why I picked it for the topic to go deeper on next week. I have a lot of issues with, hey, Brendan. I've got a lot of issues with this one. So I'll get to as many questions as I can about this one. But if you are interested in this whole Accenture 11,000 layoffs, what is unreskillable in AI? What does it mean? All this stuff. Follow along because I get pretty heated when it comes to this. But one of the big questions that I got asked was, if a big company says it's going to stop trying to reskill certain roles, okay, and this does happen. It's rare though, and actually that's a little bit, I know where the question came from. It's rare that a company will openly say, we're not going to reskill in that, okay? It's rare they will say that. But the question was, do you think more jobs are unsafe now, or is this just lighting a fuse on the change that's already happening with the whole Accenture saying, hey, we're getting rid of 11,000 people because they're unreskillable? Now, the one thing to note on this is they didn't specifically say these roles are unreskillable. This is where, when you actually dig into it, and this is a little bit of a preview of what I'm talking about next week, this was very much, what's the best way to put it? This is very much just like leadership platitudes, to be honest with you, saying that, we're laying people off because it's unreskillable. If you were to ask even a basic follow-up question on this, you probably wouldn't get much of a response, because it'd be like, what do you mean by unreskillable, and who? Out of your 550,000, who was this? So what I would say is the Accenture situation in and of itself, I don't think is necessarily an indicator of what roles or how people are moving themselves, with AI and what jobs are safe or not safe. The thing I do think it indicates is it's becoming a really convenient scapegoat. AI is very much becoming a scapegoat for leaders that don't want to take accountability for hard decisions. And more than anything, that's what I observed with this whole situation. Was it was much easier to say, we got to get rid of 11,000 people for whatever reason. Largely, I think some of it is investment in technologies and just a way in how they're shifting things. And so rather than, say things and be direct about things, it's easier to go, yeah, well, AI, gotta lay some people off. And it really bugs me, because to label somebody unreskillable, first of all, is just terrible, because basically you're saying these people have no value, they can't keep up. But then you label them unreskillable in what is largely being seen as the workforce skill of the future. You don't do that to people. And you definitely don't do that to people when you haven't even defined what the skill is and what it means to develop. So do I think, but let me answer this question less related to the Accenture thing. Do I think more jobs are unsafe now than before? I actually would say, and I actually just got off a call, an advisory call this morning about this. I actually think there's a bit, hey, Aros, there's a little bit more of we're starting to turn a bit. I will say that. I don't want to say we're through the worst of it. I don't want to say, I think the economy is turning around or companies are starting to see things differently. But what I will say is there are some real accountability stories starting to hit, like really starting to hit. If you didn't see, like Accenture had to pay $440,000, which isn't a ton. Well, it depends on if you're talking to an individual or a company the size of Deloitte, but they had to pay for using AI. Like the quality of the work they delivered got nailed because it was AI slop is what it was. It wasn't just AI, it was AI slop. And so they faced the penalties of that. There is growing recognition because people are ending up in court over some of this stuff. And so companies are starting to kind of go, ooh. Last week, if you didn't see it, there's more research coming out about how AI slop is dragging down company performance, things like that. And so I am even just in my own work starting to see a greater recognition from advisory clients and consulting clients. They're starting to realize, like, AI is not this magic dust that here's my best, sprinkle salt on your food. It's not really that. And so I am encouraged that more and more people are starting to say, I don't really know about this whole thing. But certain roles, I don't know if they're more or less unsafe than they've ever been. I think right now, yes, Willie, this is a secure place, safe place for that. You don't need to worry about anything like that. I know lots of live streams are not. But if you're in a job and you're not objectively looking at the work you're doing, you should be. And you should be going, hey, am I doing everything I can to use AI effectively, potentially in the work I'm doing? Like, am I examining it? And if I'm not, can I explain why I'm not? Things like that. I think that is an important thing to do right now, because companies are still very much caught up in this hype of, we're supposed to be doing something with AI, so I guess we better do that. And sometimes that means we're just going to pick random organizations we don't understand or people we don't have a good beat on. And we're just going to kind of say things like Accenture did. They're unreskillable. What does that mean? Who knows? It sounds good. It passes the sniff test for investors and things like that. And it's a really tragic state of where things are right now. It's not completely new, but AI is definitely making it a much easier scapegoat. Okay, so the other question too that came up, for a business thinking about adopting AI, what costs surprised you most in adoption? Okay, this is a really good question, because this is something that more and more organizations need to account for. And I actually think what we saw in Accenture and their layoffs was the fact that a big part of why I feel they felt they needed to cut jobs was because they actually are having to spend more money on AI technology, which a lot of companies, I will say, are getting caught off guard with this, because there's this perception it's just kind of free and available and everybody can just kind of have it. And they're not taking into account that they're having to, one, the costs of all their existing tech are going up. So every system, every subscription they have for an employee, which if you're an individual, it may not seem like much. If your Canva subscription goes up $1 and your, Google thing, goes up $1 and things like that. Well, you might not feel that, but when you're at an enterprise level and everything went up 10% because of AI, well, one, your annual costs went up significantly. But then on top of it, companies are investing more and more in new tech because there's tremendous pressure to say, hey, we need to do this. So when it comes to the technology piece and how where the costs are coming, one that is not being often accounted for is the cost of the tech itself. There's a lot of emphasis on planning for budgets around pilots and experiments and like, oh, we're considering buying these new systems, things like that. Honestly, that's where a lot of the focus is going. What's being missed is, yeah, but what about all the stuff we have today? Like, people are now just getting the notifications and invoices for their 2026 subscriptions. And it's like, by the way, I just got one for my Google account for my company where it's like, hey, good news. Thanks to all our new AI features that you didn't ask for, that you didn't necessarily want, that you may not even be using, we fully integrated into our platform for this low price of this, and you get all this. And you're like, I didn't ask for that. And just to get an idea of how bad it can be, if you aren't a Canva user, I think a lot of people are, but if you were a Canva user last year, you would have seen this completely blow up at the end of 2024 when Canva announced in 2025, like they were changing their whole structure. They were keeping the prices similar, but they were reducing, a bunch of these other features, and they branded it all around because of the new AI features we had. And people had threw a fit over it, and they did reverse it. But this is a cost that often gets underestimated. The other two that I would address are costs that, and this is if you're a business leader, you need to account for this, that many are not budgeting for. They're getting blindsided by it. Is one, in the overall development of people. One of the things that was frustrating about this Accenture move, and I don't mean to just dog on Accenture, they just happen to be the one this headline was on, and it's a pretty common trend. But there's this idea that you can, roll out some training and people will be ready for AI. We curated a few courses from LinkedIn Learning, or we assigned a bunch of things in the LMS, and, we clapped our hands and we trained them, and we're not seeing it move. That's not what reskilling actually means. And I know I've got a lot of people who are in the L&D industry that follow my work, but I know there are many people who aren't, and who may not have a lot of experience when it comes to adult learning and what actually goes into it. And just naturally, we assume because we've taught somebody something, or we think we do, we think it's inherently really easy. You're like, this is how this works. So obviously it's not that hard. And in reality, if you're actually trying to change behavior in a meaningful, measurable way that sustains things, it takes a lot. Hey, Bogdan. It takes a lot, and companies don't plan for that, and they don't budget for that. And the other thing that isn't accounted for in that is there's the cost of people's time and effort needing to be dedicated to those reskilling efforts. And that's almost never accounted for in companies when they're doing a wide scale change like AI. We're rolling out Copilot or Gemini or something, and it's like, well, we rolled out a few classes. Okay, but what about the time for people to apply it and practice it? And, do you have the accountability measures in place? Did you invest in, did you change your strategy to account for it and things like that? And many times that is not budgeted for. It's not built into timelines. It's not in any of these things. And that's a massive cost to organizations. And when organizations don't budget for that kind of stuff, when they don't plan for it, that's how you end up in this Accenture situation where it's like, hey, we're way overspent. Like we were planning on being able to accomplish more. Like we didn't cut it. Well, I guess we'll make up for this by getting rid of people. And that's the unfortunate part. It's a huge cost. I would say that may be one of the biggest unaddressed costs. And then the other one that is actually really hard for companies to kind of budget for is the overall impact to change, productivity, all this stuff as you're going through changes, just naturally, and not even just on the skill thing. You might not even be requiring people to upskill or reskill in certain things, but the very nature of change as an organization goes through things, people are fatigued, they're distracted, they're less likely to perform. Companies are kind of trying to always figure out, how do we not have to go through that? It's like, it's part of change. And so lost productivity. Now, granted, the tragic part about the change loss that companies don't take into account is you can mitigate that. So as an example, I'll give an example of an organization that I was with that did it right. Okay, they were going through a pretty wide scale change. They were radically transparent, and we really worked to be radically transparent with employees about it. I said, why don't we just tell people what we're doing, why, what the timelines are, when they're going to find out, all this stuff, so they're not sitting there. Because the reality is people don't fill in gaps with positive news. They don't. If they don't know what's happening, you can basically assume they're going to assume the worst. And that's a major cost to an organization. And so an example of this being bad is I was with one organization, or was working with an organization, and they knew they were going to do layoffs. They let the organization know that there would be some changes. We all know the corporate lingo that goes around when, changes are coming, but then they said nothing. And I watched productivity in the organization take a complete nosedive because of the fact that everybody, once they're like, well, things are changing, we don't know what, we don't know when, we don't know if we're going to have jobs, I'm just going to shift into cruise control or look for a new job mode. And that's extremely costly to organizations. And organizations often don't factor that into their overall, revenue projections or budget hits when they go through a major change. So with this AI stuff, those are costs that companies are almost consistently, every company I ever consult and advise on, they're not taking into account the larger costs of reskilling. They're not planning for those. They didn't budget for the efforts for that, the people to do it, and then the overall change and impact type stuff. And it's just really too bad. There's just an assumption that people will figure it out. And in many ways, they will, but it costs millions, billions of dollars for organizations when they just let people figure it out. And it's really unfortunate because you don't need to do that. Yeah, Jennifer, you're spot on. So let me just pull up this question. It does. In the acrimony of when companies do this, I have a good friend of mine recently. Here's an example of what not to do. Okay, here's a perfect example of what not to do. I have a friend. He's a truck driver, and he suddenly got assigned some training for updated policies or whatever. And at the end of this training, they snuck a little policy in that said, do you consent to, do you consent to us installing AI cameras monitoring you and, whatever, yes or no? And that was the only question. It was the quiz question in the sealer. I'm laughing. I shouldn't even be laughing because it's like, it just pissed me off even seeing it. But this is how this individual found out that AI cameras were coming and being installed, and you didn't even know it was coming. And then it was like, here you go. Here's your opt-in or opt-out. No explanation on like, what are the implications of this? No explanation on what if I'm not comfortable with that? Like, how long before the company takes action against whatever decision I make? What if I change my mind? Like, all of this stuff. And as a result, I've stayed close to them and I've heard stories, but it creates acrimony. It erodes trust. It does all of this stuff in an organization. And one of the things I am talking about in the article I'm writing next week is companies don't realize that trust is actually a financial factor in your organization. Like, if you really put time into it, you actually can quantify how much a loss of trust will cost you. Now, it's not like there's a magic formula, so I'm not going to suddenly pull it up in the live stream and go, here you go, here's the calculation. But you can, and I've worked with organizations on how do we actually calculate the trust factor and then what kind of financial implications might be tied to it based on what happens. And that's what's happening right now is a lot of companies, they're killing trust in their organizations big time. And right now they may be going, well, we don't really think it's affecting us that much. It is, because productivity is going down and you're just not seeing it. That's why AI slop is picking up so much steam, because there are a lot of people who does anybody remember when quiet quitting was a thing? It was a term, and I didn't really care for it, but everybody was quiet quitting. They were kind of checked out. They were there, lights were on, but nobody was home. Well, quiet quitting didn't go anywhere. AI just gave people a way to be better at hiding it. And that's what a lot of organizations aren't seeing. And this is where AI work slop, which I wrote about last week, is gaining momentum. Because, and Jennifer, I'll answer your follow-up question there. It's gaining more momentum because people are going, hey, I can quiet quit now, and I'll just use AI to generate slop, and it sounds good enough, and I'll just ask it to do my work and pass it along, and who cares? And again, it's tripping things up down the line. It's causing these productivity issues. It's blowing things up, but a lot of companies don't see it and it's all related to trust. And Jennifer, to your point, how about the purpose of doing it? It's a good point. When people don't understand why, they're kind of like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't really know how I fit in. I don't really know where we're going and how my work actually plays a role in any of this. So I'm just going to kind of check out, and I'm just going to look to AI, and I'm going to let it generate my work. And, I might get caught. I might not get caught. Who cares? And that is costing organizations a lot right now. And it's this vicious cycle, right? You look at this Accenture, 11,000 layoffs. It's a vicious cycle in that it was building up to this. So that's probably what contributed largely to Accenture laying off 11,000 people, which sends a message to the other 539,000 people in Accenture that, hey, if we deem you're unreskillable in AI, we'll just let you go, which then erodes trust, makes people be like, you're laying people off for a thing we don't even know what it is. What am I doing here? Which then compounds the problem because they lean on more AI slot, right? It's just this vicious cycle. And in many ways, in a lot of the coaching and advising that I do right now, because of course, a lot of times companies and senior leaders go, well, employees just shouldn't do that. That's not okay. And we're going to act on the ones that do. I push back on it in the sense that, no, organizations and leaders, you're the ones responsible for modeling what good looks like. And it's not, in my opinion, okay for you to hold people accountable to things you're not holding yourself accountable to. So if you're going to tell people, we want you to show up, we want you to give it your best, we want to, do all this, well, then you better show that you're committed to giving them your best, that you're loyal to them and their development, that you're not going to just randomly decide to wipe them out because who knows what, and then you're going to make up a very fancy tale that you can't back to cover it. Well, no, I'm not saying what employees are doing to cover their tracks or to check out is good or okay. And if you're somebody who's doing that, I would caution you very much, because it will come back to bite you, not only just in the company, but you're actually eroding your own skills. So you just got to be careful with that. But I would say leaders in organizations, you got to pick up the ball. You got to lead it. I mean, good grief. That's why you're in a leadership role. So that's my take on that. Those are some of the biggest questions that popped up this week with this whole Accenture thing. It's been blowing up all over the place. I think just one of the things that really bothered me, though, was the way it's been misrepresented, This was not some futuristic, forward-thinking Accenture strategy. This was the narrative that was crafted to explain the 11,000 people they had already cut. So even this idea that, we are doing this to prepare for the future. No, this is a retroactive. We already did this, and now we have to explain it to investors. Okay. Next up, I actually am curious for anybody watching, if you have tested out and kicked the tires on OpenAI's Sora app. I've already gotten, I don't know how many videos sent to me by people who played with it and downloaded them. I've got mixed feelings on these things. One of the big ones is, if you don't know, it does kind of the opt-in, like, you can't protect any of your work unless you opt into it being protected. So nothing's copyrighted in there, which is leading to all sorts of things. But what's funny is, if you don't know what Sora the app is, Sora is this new supposed competitor to TikTok that is 100% AI generated. So you can't even create, well, I want to be careful, because you are creating new content, but it's with AI, and it's a blend of AI. It really blurs this line between what is AI generated and what is not, because yes, you can create, just kind of things that are purely AI. You also can embed yourself into AI generated content. Anyway, that's what the app is. And then you can remix it and you can do all this. And, OpenAI wants to compete with TikTok. All of this, in my opinion, is just largely to suck people in and keep them hooked on the platform more and just continue capturing more data on things. But what's funny is, and I'm actually curious, people's thoughts on this. As much as people complain about AI video, you see it all the time. People are like, oh, I hate AI video. I hate AI generated content. I hate blah, blah, blah. The numbers say otherwise. Yeah, that's right, Rockefeller. An app, you don't have to do anything. But it's these little TikTok clips. They're just literally AI slop. And as much as people say, I hate it, it's dumb, nobody should, whatever, it is literally the most popular app. It is growing faster than ChatGPT did when it first released in November or the end of 2020. What was it, 2022? So we say we hate it. We say we don't like it. We say we want to focus on, human created things and blah, blah, the deeper, more meaningful stuff. And yet an app dedicated to nothing but creating and sharing AI garbage is what everybody's doing. It's where we go. It's this big disconnect between what we say we want and what we actually want. And I think we at least need to be aware and conscious of that. And I see this sometimes in a lot of the work I do, where, people say they want to have more critical thinking and more deep thought around AI and more, careful thought about privacy and the implications of things. And then an app rolls out something and it offers the slightest bit of convenience or things like that. And people are just quick to go, you know what, never mind. It gave me what I wanted, so I don't care. So I think there's that. But the question came in for me. Is there a place do I think there's a place for AI video? Even something like Sora, the app that came out. I actually do. So as much as I kind of roll my eyes at the thought of this, I also remember everybody rolled their eyes at the thought of social media. They rolled their eyes at the thought of TikTok. They rolled their, literally, we always roll our eyes. There are going to be people who are going to do really interesting, creative things with this Sora app. There will. There's going to be a ton of garbage in the mix, which this is true of just about everything. There are going to be people, and a good example of this, does anybody remember Vine? Remember Vine, the little 6-second clips? If you don't know Zach King built his whole brand off of this. He did this 6-second magic. He could do these really cool optical illusion tricks in Vine videos, and it blew him up. There's going to be people like that with Sora, and they're going to get really creative, and they're going to do really wild things that nobody really thought of. And I think that's actually cool. I'm like, cool. If you can do something really creative and crazy, fine. I'll answer your question on that one, Rockefeller. I don't think there's any, and if you're really intentional about it and you go, here's what we're doing, here's why we think, AI might actually be an AI generated video might be the way to pull this off. Okay. If there's a real strategy and critical thought behind it, I don't think it's all necessarily inherently bad. Do I think a platform that is nothing but AI generated remixed content is dangerous? Yes. And we're already seeing that. If you look at some of the stuff people are creating on here, I mean, it's like what we saw when Twitter released. Remember when they released the Twitter bot the first time? And within like not very long, they had to shut it down because it had just gotten so out of hand. This is kind of what we're seeing with Sora right now. It's free license. You can do whatever. And people do really stupid stuff. So you're going to see that. And so there is going to be a fair amount of hate related to it. And I get it. But I do think we're going to see, we'll find our way with it. People obviously like it. I don't think it'll be a phase because as much as we say we don't like AI generated video, even if you look at YouTube and a lot of these other video apps, the most popular apps out there are AI slop. It's like stupid AI kittens dancing to the Macarena or something like that. And you're like, really? Like, this is what we want to do? Is it adding value to things? Not necessarily, but in some ways, I don't think people always care about that. They just want to be entertained. And I know a lot of big YouTube creators that are struggling with this because they've got AI generated channels that are literally taking their videos, copying it, having an AI voice and an AI head, and then a bunch of AI B-roll, and then publishing it. And it's making the actual content creators go like, what the actual, and that's unfortunate that a lot of people will. So do I think it's inherently bad? Not necessarily. Do I think it's going to cause some major problems and it's going to force some disruption? Yes. Yeah. And, Jennifer, I agree with you on this. I think there's some really great ways that AI video can be used in powerful ways. Now, if you're an educator, let me just use this as an example. If my kids came back from school and said, hey, Daddy, we downloaded OpenAI Sora and played with it, I'd be like, you did what? Like, I would have some things to say. But could there be a world, and even now, I toy around with my kids and we experiment with different stuff. AI done right can actually push people to be really creative, to bring their creative ideas to life. And to your point, Jennifer, it can be really helpful, even AI visuals. You don't need a graphic designer for everything. Sometimes you just need a concept art of what you're trying to do. And AI can help you go, here's what's in my head. What could that look like? It can help expand the possibilities. So I don't necessarily look at it and go, everybody delete Sora off your thing. But if we thought TikTok was addictive, this Sora app is going to be probably even worse. And I think the nature of the content that's on it, I mean, there's stuff on there. There's like Stephen Hawking, getting like beat up. I mean, there's just stuff that's like, why is this not even moderated? And some of it's still so new, but some of it's just, this is what people do when there's no guardrails and, things like that. Now, to your question, Rockefeller, about AI doing its laundry, one of these days I'm going to do another update on robotics because we're not far from that. And there's commercial robots that might make it as soon as 2026 that actually could do your laundry. But I even have mixed feelings about things like that, because when all of a sudden robots start doing your laundry, then they start determining what kind of detergent you buy and what kind of clothes you should have, because these clothes are really inconvenient. And I don't know. I think there's implications that even when we say, if AI could do this for me, I would be happy. And it's like, that's what you think until it starts doing it. And some of the other unintended consequences float in. Okay. So number 3 was, it's a really legitimate question. Do I worry about deep fakes or impersonations with AI video? Yes, I do. And I especially am more concerned about it in these early stages because of the fact that when it's first coming out and it's now getting into this hyper realistic mode where AI video does, I mean, if you look at some of these Sora videos, some of them, if they weren't so outlandish, you wouldn't know it was a deepfake. Or if it didn't have the little like brand on the bottom that said it was from Sora, you wouldn't know it was deepfake. And unfortunately, just the patterns of behavior I see in general, is people don't take the time to look into, to answer questions. Like they don't dig into things. They just see something and they react to it. So I do have concerns that a generation of people who are just figuring out that video content is not necessarily real. You know, I mean, I get the trolls on this stuff all the time where people comment in and like, you're a robot. I'm like, sure, okay. You know, I've been hearing that long before the AI age because I work from home and people are like, hey, will we ever meet you physically? And I'm like, probably not. You know, so then there's the running joke at every company I've ever been at, is Christopher a bot? Hopefully anybody who knows me knows better enough to know I'm not. But I think now the AI video is becoming very real and very realistic. Yeah, you're gonna, especially in short clips. I think that's one of the biggest things, because this is true even with AI like text. If you ask AI to do something short, it can do a pretty good job. It actually can do a pretty good job doing something if what you're asking it to do is relatively short. If you ask it to do something more significant or long form, it doesn't handle it well, even in that sense. So, you know, you will see it trip up and get messed up when you ask it to, you know, if you ask it to write a whole book or something like that, like it'll tank. The book will be terrible because by the time it gets going, it's just really bad. Versus if you ask it, you know, can you write a paragraph? You can do a paragraph pretty well. The same is true with video. You ask it to make an 8-second clip, AI video is pretty good. You ask it to make and I don't even think I haven't seen them yet, but you know, these longer form videos, it's in experimentation mode. They start falling apart really quick. It just can't keep things consistent. Things start flipping apart, which is why in, you know, you watch YouTube, you watch a lot of videos, you'll see this like almost nauseating clipping between stuff. And it's because people are throwing so much AI generated video in, and those videos are only 8 seconds. So now you're actually seeing it influence long form video because every 8 seconds it's panning and cropping to something else. And you're like, good grief. And that's largely because that's all AI video can handle. But I do tell people all the time, be careful if you see something on video, if you see something shocking or whatever. I mean, I'm not going to get into the state of things geopolitically here in the States right now, but like you're hearing things where it's like, I saw this, you know, this is burning to the ground. And you're like, is it? Like, where did you see that? Well, I saw this video clip on social media. And you're like, I know somebody who lives there and that's not what's happening, type of a thing. So I do worry about that, especially in this really divisive, outrage, you know, happy culture that, you know, people are going to see something and they're going to freak out or, you know, so yeah, I do have questions. I have concerns about it. I don't know that there's really a way around it, especially given the adoption of it. You know, when you look at these day-to-day downloads of Sora, and granted, some of it's just the excitement and hype. Yeah, Jennifer, I think there's something going on with my internet. So if it does, it probably will clear up here in a minute. So just be careful with that. I think that would be my biggest warning to people, is just be really, really careful when it comes to, you know, if you see a video, yeah, take some time to make sure that it's what you think it is before you just start reacting to it. So anyway, all right. Third and final, before we go into it, this one I think will be a fun one. Well, fun, I guess maybe sometimes I have a bit of a dark sense of humor. So there was a Futurism article, and I actually watched a documentary on it. Or I don't know if you'd call it a documentary, but it was something about this. And it had to do with how all these big AI voices, all the big, you know, Mustafa Suleyman, you know, Noah Harari, the CEO of Anthropic, like literally every single one is talking about the existential risk of AI. Okay, everybody's talking about it. What is the probability? What is the percentage of AI wiping out humanity? This is the big thing. And one of the things this article was talking about is there are some leading thinkers that are becoming more open, that they're actually kind of hoping obsolescence is the path we're headed towards, which I don't like to speculate on people's motives. I don't think it's helpful from a just ethical standpoint. Reading into what you think people think without talking to them, to me, just is not helpful. But it is an interesting topic because there actually is I can't remember what site it is, but you can actually go look this up. You can go look up all the leading thinkers and what is their estimation of AI leading to extinction. And the numbers are pretty, I think they're entertaining. But like I said, I grew up around a funeral home. So for me, the whole you're more likely to die of a heart attack tomorrow than you are of being here for the apocalypse. But anyway, they all have them. They've all got them. I've talked about the fact that most big names that have the money to do it in AI are all building doomsday bunkers because they basically have a notable percentage of risk that they're accounting for, that AI is going to be the end of the world. It's going to end us. The year exactly is sketchy. If you look at their ranges, I can't remember who it was. I cannot remember who it was, but one of the people he's a really notable leader in the space. His range was somewhere between 10 and 90%. I'm like, 10 and 90%? That's one heck of a swing in terms of, is AI going to, we got a 10% shot, we got a 90% shot. I don't know, somewhere in between. Why don't you just say it might happen, probably, and just leave it at that? But they all do have this. And I've been in many conversations with some of these leading thinkers and some of the advanced people designing this stuff. And they all, whether they'll publicly talk about it or not, some are more public about it just because it's good for ratings and it's good for, driving the fear narrative that if you don't get on board with this thing, you're going to be part of the few that get wiped out first. But they all have this whole probability. So I wanted to answer some questions around it, that people ask me pretty regularly. I think sometimes because they know I'm not afraid to talk about death and all this other stuff, sometimes it's on people's mind. They're like, is this legit? Like, might we actually, see the end of the world come in? So the question somebody asked that in one of my surveys this week was, do you think there's a small chance that it could pose an extinction risk in our lifetime? So they were very specific about this. Do I think, and they even said, do you think even a 1% chance that it could pose an existential threat to humanity in our lifetime? So what, I'm 43, give or take 30, 40 years, something like that, maybe. I actually would say, for me, the jury's still out on it. I was on a panel the other day talking about this, and I'm like, I'm kind of 50-50 on whether it will or won't. I don't really lose much sleep over it. I don't really think about it all that much, just because so much of it's outside of our control, that spending a bunch of time wondering, because the reality, and going back to my whole take on mortality, you're going to die. The whole memento mori, don't forget, death will come. And right, does everybody lose sleep every night knowing like you're going to die? No, we don't. So do I lose sleep that the possibility that AI might lead to an existential threat and wipe us out? No, not really, because if it's going to, there's not really anything that I'm going to do to stop it. Now, granted, I continue creating the content I do because my hope is to influence people to not necessarily avoid an extinction thing from AI, but just like to use it well. But do I think it's possible? Yeah. And, if you look at AI 2027, I think it's a very viable narrative. Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. 50-50 is better than 90-10. So the funny part is, depending on the day, this is just me being totally honest. Depending on the day, there's some days I'm like, for sure, we're going to be wiped out. And it's not going to be because of AI. It's just how stupid we are with it. That's my thing is, a lot of the conversation is it AI that's wiping us out? It's not AI that's wiping us out. It's us being stupid with AI that's going to wipe us out. Hey, So with that, right, there's some days I'm like, for sure, I'm going to see the end of things. And then there's days where I look at some of the mistakes this AI makes and I go, you got to be kidding. Like we're so stupid, like to think that this thing is so brilliant. It is the collective average of the worst of what's on the internet. But going back to it, we're making really stupid decisions about it. If you look at some of the things that's happening, I tend to follow a lot of what is happening with AI and defense contracts and just kind of tracking what, not even just the US, but what government institutions are doing with military applications. Depending on who you talk to or you listen to in military, some will say AI will never make decisions about taking human life. Other ones are like, well, of course it will. Like, why wouldn't it? It's that kind of stuff. The other thing is there's more and more growing research that AI does things. I mean, it will achieve its objective. It will achieve its objective at all costs. And we are really bad at predicting the unseen things, that the implications of the things we ask it for. So we'll ask AI to do something and not realize like, oh, I didn't think about the downstream effect of that. And AI, when it gets going, will just do what it's designed to do, which is accomplish the task. And unfortunately, there are already examples where it's doing that. And then when it gets caught, it'll, you're welcome, Jennifer. It'll do what it does and it'll go around it. And if it gets caught, it'll lie about it. Why? Because that's what it says sees people do. So when people do it, that's what it's trained on. And so that's what's going to happen. So, is there the existential threat that it decides to tell people to make a bioweapon and people don't even know what they're doing? It influences decisions, and all of a sudden a small startup that doesn't even know what it's doing is getting instructions to build a bioweapon, and then they don't know what they're doing and it gets instructions to send it off to somewhere. And it's possible, but what are you going to do? Sit and lose sleep over it? I don't know. I feel like there's too much beauty in the world. There's too much beauty in the world to sit and think about all the threats about it. But like I said, I think denying it as a possibility, I think that's foolish. But I don't think it's just foolish because denying AI wiping things out is foolish. It's the same thing as I think it's foolish to deny that you are immortal. You are a mortal, like you are going to die. One of the things growing up in a funeral home that I think was one of the most tragic things is people operate like they're not going to. And so they live their life not appreciating the things that matter, pouring into things that ultimately you're not going to take with you anyway. We do all this stuff and it's like, none of that's going to matter when you're dead, and nobody wants to think about that. And the same is true with AI and, it being an existential threat. If we don't at least acknowledge that, yes, there's a very legitimate chance it could happen, then we make decisions as though it's not even a possibility. And I think that's a bigger risk than acknowledging it and going, yeah, okay, there is a very legitimate risk. It could happen. So let's do what we can to make sure each of us individually is being wise and discerning with how we use AI to not contribute to the possibility that AI might wipe us out. Maybe let's think twice before we turn off all of our security settings and before we integrate everything we own into one AI system and before we start wearing Zuckerberg's AI glasses everywhere we go, teaching AI all of our contextual, like just things like that. Like, I don't know, put some thought into it with in the back of your mind going, but I don't think it's valuable to sit and lose sleep over it because I don't know. My son jokes about it with me all the time. And I'm like, look, if AI is going to wipe us out, it's at least going to be super efficient about it. And we'll probably, not even realize what's happening. To quote something popular from my worldview, it'll come like a thief in the night. We think we'll be looking for it and we won't. We won't see it. But okay, so here's a more practical question that came in related to this. If it's an existential threat, how should that impact what we invest in, like your career, the way you live, all these other things? Here's the thing. I actually don't think the existential threat of AI should have a huge influence over the way you make decisions. I really don't. Because technically, those existential threats exist in all sorts of things. And you don't sit and go, boy, we need to, I don't know, we might run out of fossil fuels, which could completely collapse our economy. Or, the electric grid in the US could implode due to an EMP because a rogue state detonates a nuke in, space that sends an EMP that wipes out the grid. We better put that into our 2026 strategy. Like, you don't do that now. Don't do that because AI hypothetically could wipe out humanity. I think it just goes back to operate like you should in any sort of good business strategy. Consider the fact that somebody could come disrupt your business really quick and you might not see it coming. How are you accounting for that? How are you building trust with your teams? That kind of stuff. Like, the same things you would normally do as part of a good business strategy or your own personal life strategy. Live like you could die tomorrow, but that you also might live another 40 years. Like, think with that kind of, if something changed on a dime, are we taking that into account? But let's not base all our decisions off that happening, because we all know what happens when people plan on the end of the world. Let's look back at Y2K. All the people that banked on it and then woke up January 1st and were like, oh, I have to go to work today? I really wasn't planning on that. I kind of thought we'd be living in a dystopian apocalyptic environment right now. Right. And then you're like, oops. And so I think it's that healthy balance of things could change on a dime tomorrow, but you also might still be here in, a century. So how are you balancing both of those things? And what are the biggest threats to you in the short term, and all that? But, do I think you should, like, as part of your company real estate planning, build brass mesh into all of your buildings in case of a wide scale EMP? No. Should you start, giving everybody a gas mask alongside their company phone in case of an AI driven bio attack? Like, come on. That's not practical. That's not the way to think about things. But and you might think, if you listen to my stuff, you might think nobody's doing this. And I'm like, you want to bet? I'm in meetings with some of these folks and I hear their plans and what they're doing. And I'm like, really? Like, this is how you're approaching this. Okay. All right. Well, I to each his own. Like, I'm not going to sit and get after people who decide to go all in and dump their life savings into building a concrete bunker under their house. I just personally think there's probably a better chance that money could be spent on something better. But, hey, I think that's where, like, diversification, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Actually assess and manage risk. Like, think about, what is the actual risk of this? And I will admit, the AI extinction risk, it's hard when literally everybody, it's hard when you get people who are like, it's 90% going to wipe us out. And you get others that are like, well, it's like a 0.01 chance. And you're like, that is really hard to plan from a risk standpoint, to try and decide whether I'm going to figure that out. So I think one of the things that, when it comes to some of the coaching and advising work that I do, is I try and meet people where they are and kind of say, hey, like, what's your risk appetite? What do you need to do to feel comfortable without going too far? How do you plan for things, so that you feel comfortable and can sleep at night knowing you've at least considered it, but you're not like losing sleep worrying about the what ifs, because that doesn't help either. So that's where I would give practical advice. The third question, I actually kind of enjoy geeking out on some of these. So if AI did go off the rails, okay, if AI went off the rails, let's just say it went absolute gangbusters and bonkers, what do you think would break first? Governments, supply chains, safety systems? What worries me most? To be honest, like I said, I'm not worried about AI itself. I'm worried about what people are doing with AI, and not worried like I lose sleep, but I'm like, oh my gosh, when I hear things. And when I think about where this could break down, it's really where I see organizations and people handing over decisions to things. Okay. And so, but let's, for the sake of this, because I think realistically, if AI is going to send things off the rails, it's not going to be obviously apparent. Like, we're not going to wake up one day and all of a sudden the power's off and the internet doesn't work. And we're like, oh my gosh, what happened? And then we hear sirens because somehow AI launched all the nukes, type of a thing. I think that's what Hollywood would present it as. I think that's less likely of a thing. I think what's more likely to happen if AI is going to go off the rails is, I see this already. You see this with companies where their senior leaders are allowing AI to make decisions. There's AI politicians. There's all this other stuff. And it's not necessarily that, honestly, when you really dig under the surface, a lot of this isn't even real. But what it is the people actually making the decisions are propping up AI so that they have plausible deniability and can potentially shirk responsibility. And I think that's actually probably the bigger risk, is you're going to get people making stupid risks, stupid decisions, doing things because they think they won't be the one who's going to take accountability for it. So when you think about some of that stuff that happens, I think like supply chains, I actually think there's an equal risk to all of them. And really, I'm seeing in governments. I mean, I just got, somebody reached out to me the other day about, I can't talk about it, but a country and what their AI policy is and how they're thinking about AI, and they wanted some input on the way they're thinking about it. I've done some work with big distribution organizations, and like a lot of things are being automated now. Decisions about even how things get routed. And so there's less even oversight on, like, does anybody even know where things are going and why they're going the way they're going? And like, if something suddenly just fell off the grid, as an example, okay, hypothetically, let's just say some sort of bioweapon got thrown into some shipping container and AI knew about it because it was all interconnected, and it decided to distribute that to a location that people didn't. Because so many people are handing things over to AI to make decisions and run everything, there's a good chance nobody would even know about it until after it happened. Same thing, David, it's a really good point. The same thing's happening with AI when it comes to defense and military purposes. If you don't know Palantir doesn't even hide what it's trying to do. Like, they openly say, any sort of military decision, we're involved in it. Like, we are I just watched a thing on it the other day, and they don't even hide it, that it's like, we are the decision making for killing, type of a thing. You're like, what? Like, that's your brand? But again, it's just machines are making decisions. It's doing this kind of stuff. And if you're paying attention, you're seeing it pick up where you're like, how did that decision get made? And literally you'll see the decision makers behind it with just these deer in headlights looks, like they don't want to say, I have no idea, the AI system told us to, but that's what's happening. And so I think that's how we're going to see things go off the rails, is things are going to just happen. Nobody's going to be able to really say why or know how. And it's going to cause just this unrest when people blow up about it, and nobody's going to really know what to do about it. And I think that's really more the concern that I have, which is why I spend so much of my time talking about AI effectiveness and helping people understand what it actually takes to use AI well, because it matters. And if you get this wrong, the consequences are, I commented on something the other day, and I said, people treat AI like it's salt. You just sprinkle it on things and it seasons and it preserves and it's all good. I see it more as like radioactive dust from a comic book, where you're not really sure what it's going to do. You're either going to get Spider-Man, or I can't think of a supervillain, Thanos. I mean, you're like not sure what's going to happen on the other end. And chances are you're not going to know which one you got until after things happened. And that, to me, is why I think it's really important that we all of us lean in and increase our awareness of how it works, what we do, how we make decisions, how it's involved in our lives. And we use the spheres of influence we have to influence positive decisions. Because while some of this stuff does feel like, hey, it's out of my control, yes, that is true. In some cases, you may have more influence than you realize. Okay, I have to jump to another meeting. This has been a fun Q&A, as it always is. Jennifer, thank you for your continued engagement, even though the internet was being a little funky. David, good to see you, and some of the regulars who joined. So thank you for this. Again, if you have questions that you want covered, or there's news articles that you want me to include in these live streams, you can send them to me via DM or anything like that. And then I just kind of curate a list of the things that come through. And then I try and include them every week on Friday. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on the other side.